I mean, the to use a Glassman quote, they differ in need, not kind, right?
Right.
So I think the hierarchical development of an athlete is, it doesn't matter if it's an individual athlete, it's a team athlete, it's a master's athlete. It comes down to, first of all, exposure and understanding what they're capable of at that moment. But then they get into, if they want to compete, it gets into like skill and drill development, right? So there's this big developmental piece in between that, right? And once they develop those baseline skills, then we start layering in the intensity of that, right? So it's just like the methodology: mechanics, consistency, intensity. If they are mechanically moving well, right? They don't have torn labrums and aches and pains and their feet don't hurt or whatever. And they're consistently doing that and they're learning those new skills and drills and practicing things, then we can layer in the intensity, right? I remember when I was competitive in the individual, like back in the regional days, I would always finish in the Northeast region. I would always finish like right around 60 or 70, like right outside of regionals. I was putting in 3 and 4 hours of training a day. I mean, granted, I own a gym and I was there all the time. So like nothing's going on. I'm like, yeah, I'll snatch, I'll back squat, I'll do
Yeah, of
whatever. Right.
course.
And now for me as an athlete, like I've acquired a lot of the skills. There's still something like they introduce double under crossovers. Like I'll work on those. Um, but like most of my focus now is on the intensity piece and understanding like what's going on in between my ears as I'm going through that. Right. There's a big component of competing is definitely, I mean, every professional athlete ever has said this: what goes on between your ears,
Yep.
right? If your body's capable and you have all those skills and drills and you have like reasonable weights that you can lift, things like that, it comes down to what your belief structure is. Do you believe that you belong there? Right. And I ran into that a little bit in 2017, or pardon me, 2021, when I went to the games. I qualified and I remember I was out at Bobby's house in Indiana and we all did the workouts together. There was 4 of us that went there. And I found out that I qualified for the games on my drive home from Indiana back to New Jersey, like by myself in the car. And it was kind of like, man, do I belong here? Right. And I think in 2021, I squandered that a little bit because I remember like on that first event, it was a 4.5 mile run. And I'm just like running along and I'm like, man, I'm just so happy to be here. Right. And I wasn't
Right.
competing. So, as the weekend progressed, it changed, but just having that mindset for all the masters athletes that I program for, I understand that their warm-ups need to be a lot longer, right? It's not like I can't be like, all right, sit on the bike for 5 minutes and then let's go hit 90% on your back squat, right? There's a longer trajectory that needs to be planned in there and it needs to be developed in a way that not just gets them moving in an appropriate pattern, but it also it improves their movement in some way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
And then we go through whatever the programming for the day is, strength or skills, and, maybe some rowing intervals, and then maybe a conditioning piece that's a little bit shorter or whatever. And then at the end, I always make sure I include some kind of like prehab, rehab kind of stuff. So most of the time for masters athletes, the training is focused around being able to recover enough so that you can hit the other pieces with intensity.
So it's funny, I've made the joke forever as a master's athlete. If you go at 5 a.m., the first round's your warm up, or it's
Yeah.
still part of your warm up. Like you do the normal warm up, and then the first round is still part of it because you need to have the longer warm up. So I love that to hear that you're saying there's some intent behind doing that. It wasn't just me being lazy.
No, it's
Um,
definitely not you being lazy.
but I am curious about how much intensity you put on a master's athlete comparatively. I have found as I've aged, I have personally focused more on capacity over intensity. Now I'm not trying
Mhm.
to compete, so it's a different thing than what you're describing here. But
Mhm.
I've personally found that intensity for me, again, just for me, has never been great. You know what I mean? Like I don't move with as much intention as I would like to because I'm so competitive. I do a lot of dumb shit when I get really intense and I'm trying to move fast. So I focus more on like kind of capacity and moving with good movement to stay injury free. For me, it's all about can I stay injury free and train 6 days a week as opposed to going crazy. Isn't how important is intensity to you?
I mean, I think intensity is pretty important. It is one of the tenets of kind of like what we do. But I think intensity, just like movements, are universally scalable, right? And like you might come in one day at 5 a.m. and you're like moving around through your warm up, and then you get through your first round and you're like, today ain't the day, kid. Right. So your intensity level, which normally might be pinned out at that 10, your, your, your top level for your intensity might be like a 7 that day. And I think a good coach can recognize that, and a good athlete should recognize that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A coachable athlete needs to understand when they're just not feeling it. Right. And then if I haven't, like, I had an athlete who I programmed for, he has something going on with his knee. Right. And so we had a lot of rehab stuff in, and I'd maneuver around the injury to make sure that he's a firefighter. So make sure he's still able to do his job. Right. And eventually he's like, I just saw like his performance just like bottom out. And I was like, I think you need a deload week, man. And I'm like, I should have recognized this sooner. It's going to keep you injury free. And as with any athlete, he's like, oh, I don't need a deload week. I'll just keep through it. But once I programmed in a deload week for him, he came back and he was able to kind of approach it with his same level of intensity as before.
When it comes to that stuff, are you finding the masters athletes you're training are more or less stubborn than your younger athletes? I know it's a tough question to answer.
I would say they're probably more stubborn.
I would agree.
I find myself having to do a lot more explaining of methodology and what my thoughts are behind things, which is good for me because it keeps me honest, right? I'm not just like throwing shit on a paper and seeing what sticks. I have to actually be thoughtful about the program, right? And they go in blocks. Everything is for my competitive athletes, everything's in blocks. Now, if we're talking about like class athletes, right? Like I'll never walk up to like Susie Q and Johnny and be like, you guys can be hitting that with some more intensity. You know what I mean? It's instead, I'm like, hey, I'm just really glad you're here. I'm glad you're here.
Let's go, Grandma, move it.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Get up off that ground.
Come on, Nana, move it.
I'm genuinely happy that people are if it's at my gym or if it's gym and I'm coaching at, I'm just glad you're here. I'm glad that you've made the choice to come in here and take time for yourself, because you don't know what people are going through, right? Like most of the members in our gym, they got other lives. This doesn't circle their, like, this isn't their, like, for me, it's my entire life, right? Like I'm CrossFit through and through, but for them, it's just like a piece of their day. This is what I do for my movement. I got sick of running long distances and my knees hurting all the time. So I came in here and now my knees hurt all the time in here.